In this video, we're going to be discussing Rabbi Yeshaya Halevi Horowitz, also known as the Shaloh. It's an acronym for his magnum opus, the Shnei Luchos Habris, the two tablets of the covenant, and that the acronym of that is Shaloh. He was born in approximately the year 1558 or 1555 in Prague, and he passed away in Israel in the year 1630 in Tiberia, Israel, Tiberias. His father was Avram ben Shabsi Sheftel. He was a tremendous scholar in his own right and wrote many books that are halachic works that are used to this day. As a young man, the Shaloh was very involved in communal work. He participated in one of the Vad Arba Aratzos. It was called the Council of the Four Lands, and the Jewish people at that time had some sort of independence, as far as taxation and other things, that they could kind of have a quasi of their own government, and that was this Council of Four Lands, which didn't last long, was part of that. He was a member. He was appointed as the Av Beit Din, the head of the rabbinical court in Austria, and later in many other cities in Europe. He served in apparently many cities, and in the year 1615, he was the rabbi then in the city of Frankfurt. The Jewish people were expelled from Frankfurt, and he left with them and became the chief rabbi of Prague, year 1614 or 15. In the year 1620, his wife Chaya, who was from a prominent rabbinical family, passed away, and he decided that now was the time and his opportunity to move to the land of Israel, which he did in 1621. He moved to Jerusalem, and he is appointed as a rabbi in Jerusalem, and he apparently got married there as well. He was that time there was a pasha, I don't know what that is, some sort of ruler that came to Jerusalem and made the Jewish people's lives miserable, eventually leading in the jailing of many rabbis, including the Shaloh, or the Shaloh HaKadosh, the Holy Shaloh as he's known, and he was eventually released and him and these other rabbis were released, and through paying a ransom and other diplomatic things, and he eventually settles in Safed, Israel, the home of many Kabbalists of the previous generation, and eventually he moves to Tiberias, where he passes away. He did before he passed away, he told his students to make an announcement in all the synagogues in Safed, in Jerusalem, that there should be no eulogy said about him. He is buried in the cemetery in Tiberias, right next to Maimonides, in that same section. With there's some other rabbis there from the Talmud who are buried there as well. Let's talk a little bit about his writings. His magnum opus is the Shaloh, the Shnei Luchos Habris. It's a fascinating book. He really, it was written at the end of his life. He completed at the end of his life, which was really meant for his children, which he ended up sending back to his children who lived, like we said, in Europe, though he was in Israel. It's a fascinating work. It's really a work of halacha primarily, though Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, is weaved throughout. He considered we mentioned in a previous video, we talked about the Pardes Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. He considered him to be one of his teachers, though obviously totally different time period, but about 100 years later. But he considered one of his teachers, and he weaves Kabbalah and halacha together. And there are many things where he'll say, well, we should do it like this because Kabbalistically it makes sense. He also wrote a siddur. He called it Shar HaShamayim, for a few reasons. It means the gates to the heavens. Apparently he arrived in Jerusalem the week of Parshas Vayetze, which is the week that the Torah tells us that Jacob said about Jerusalem, Zeh Shar Shamayim, this is the gates to the heavens. So apparently that inspired the name of the book. Shamayim is also the same numerical value as Yeshaya, Isaiah, which was his name. And it's a Kabbalistic siddur, and a very fascinating work in and of itself. He wrote other books as well, but those were his two main books. His legacy is really all about his Kabbalistic teachings. He's called the Holy Shaloh, as we mentioned. He is called the holy Rabbi Yeshaya Halevi Horowitz. He is considered, and it's something that you don't see any other rabbis of his era called the holy. Really special person who inspired Kabbalistic thought and Jewish mystical thought for many generations. As we mentioned previously, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Leadi, the Alter Rebbe, in his magnum opus, the Tanya, he mentions that he got his ideas from Mipi Sfarim and Mipi Seifrim, and they said that the Sfarim, the books, and the scholars, the books are referring to the Maharal of Prague and the Shaloh. So obviously that inspired a lot. Throughout Hasidic thought, I will say there are so many ideas that are kind of basic ideas or stepping stone ideas in Hasidic thought. Why we choose to in Hasidic thought, why it's chosen to explore these ideas. A lot of that is based on the principles of the Shaloh. Many, many, many more than you could imagine. Ideas are brought from there. Also, many customs that are brought throughout Jewish law that are brought from the Shaloh. Like I said, his book is not just a Kabbalistic book; it's really a halachic work where he really views it through the lens of Kabbalah, if you could say. Another thing that's fascinating, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Leadi, the Alter Rebbe, as a young man, before he was introduced to the Hasidic movement, he was called a Shaloh Yid. He was called essentially a follower of the Shaloh, obviously a different generation, about 100 years later than that. But the idea was that he davened from the siddur of the Shaloh, he followed the practices of the Shaloh, and it really fit in with what would later, when he would be introduced to the Hasidic movement, he used a lot of these ideas of the Shaloh to interpret the Hasidic teachings. Just another thing, that there's a lot of customs, like we said, brought from the Shaloh. There's a debate in Jewish law about the status of a turkey. We all know that in Judaism, the Torah does not list kosher birds. Therefore, the question is, how do you identify a kosher bird? So either you have to have a tradition, or you have to have certain signs. So the debate about, is the signs enough, or do you need the tradition also? Does the tradition mean like a general type of bird, or is it every specific bird? So if you have a certain type of chicken, is it therefore not kosher because it's not the exact descendant of the chickens that your ancestors viewed as kosher, etc. So apparently the Shaloh is one of the minority opinion that says that a turkey, which was discovered at that time in the 17th century, was not considered kosher, and therefore he forbade his descendants from eating it. I happen to know some of his descendants, people who are descended from the Shaloh, and some of them do it, some of them don't, and there's debate about whether that is an accurate custom, or do you have to follow it, or what if you're not a direct descendant, you're a maternal descendant, not a patrilineal descendant. At any rate, it's just a fascinating idea that till today affects practical Jewish law, whether or not descendants of his can eat turkey. There's some famous descendants, of course, is the Chozeh of Lublin, Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak of Lublin, a famous Hasidic leader who inspired many, many Hasidic leaders of Poland in the 18th century and 19th century, and also Elie Wiesel, a famous Holocaust survivor and activist who passed away about a decade ago at this point, maybe 10, 15 years ago. Very, very important. There's many, many more, obviously. Many important Jewish leaders are descendants of his, and his thought and inspiration continues to lead the Jewish people to this day. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, something I said, should have said, please put in the comments, and we hope to see you in the next video.